From compromised bridges and roadways to leaky tunnels and crumbling dams.
There it goes.
Years of Band-Aid repairs, setbacks, and delays to our most critical infrastructure, impacting the safety of homes, roads, bridges, and tunnels. Which parts of the tri-state are most at risk? Join us now for a special Team 12 investigation, Failing Foundations.
Hello everyone, I'm Tara Rosenblum on board Chopper 12, where we don't have to deal with things like potholes and traffic tie-ups and waterlogged roadways, but down there, most of us have to deal with delays, damage to our cars, and damage around every corner almost daily. It's only up high we can understand the true scope of the problem and the many number of lives impacted. The tri-state once home to the most impressive infrastructure in the entire nation. So where did things go wrong? Here's our Rich Barabi.
Everybody's complaining about the roads, absolutely everybody.
For 48 years, Joseph Sabia has operated his own auto shop. He says the state of our roads and the resulting damage to the cars and trucks he fixes are as bad as he's seen.
Our infrastructure here is falling apart, and our politicians just keep kicking the can down the road.
What does a picture of men building a sewer mean to you?
America once took pride in building out its infrastructure. Public works projects were used as a way to climb out of the Great Depression as part of FDR's New Deal, and as a tool to better connect our supply lines and improve accessibility during the Eisenhower administration. But in the years since, our infrastructure has been allowed to decay. Aging bridges, pothole-plagued roads, sewers and drains unable to contend with 21st century superstorms, and new international competition pushing the boundaries of technology. The American Society of Civil Engineers finds that nationwide, 43% of our roadways are in poor or mediocre condition, including 27% in New York, 34% in Connecticut, and 37% in New Jersey. In addition to that, 42% of all of our bridges are at least 50 years old, and more than 46,000 are considered structurally deficient. So how did we go from this to this?
I think that we have neglected and disregarded these challenges because it was easier to put it off, procrastinate, delay. We can't do it anymore.
Connecticut Senator Richard Blumenthal favors a go-big approach when it comes to tackling our nation's aging infrastructure. He says to delay would prove more costly and more dangerous in the long run.
Most people we spoke with about this said, listen, set the politics aside. It's about common sense. If you had a leak in your roof, would you just leave it? No, you'd replace it if you could afford it. If your tires were bald, would you drive on them? Of course not. You'd get them replaced. So shouldn't the government do at least that and then some?
Politicians are at the heart of this mess, in my judgment.
But former Port Authority of New York and New Jersey Executive Director and CEO George Marlin says he's skeptical that the lawmakers of today have the vision or will necessary to get the job done.
Ultimately, how do we fix this?
Well, in my judgment, what you need is for a governor or a mayor to appoint a visionary who is above the political fray and is given the authority to get something done and get those shovels in the ground.
In the meantime, only time will tell if our tires will soon be belting out a tune.
Tires on the pavement will sing, "Come on, America, the welcome mat is out."
Or crying out loud. Rich Barabi, News 12.
We're going to turn our focus now to an often overlooked but critical part of the tri-state's infrastructure. It turns out tens of thousands of us live downstream from dams in urgent need of repair, and chances are most of you probably didn't even realize it.
There it goes.
This dramatic video captures the moment a nearly century-old dam bursts.
There's the rush.
Soon, billions of gallons of water is unleashed.
hazard, life-threatening flash flooding.
Submerging thousands of homes, roads, and bridges.
Seek higher ground now.
It all played out in Michigan last year at a dam cited for safety lapses by federal regulators for years. But many experts fear more dam disasters like this one are coming, and the next time it could happen here.
Dams will fail and people could die.
A months-long Team 12 investigation analyzed the state and federal data on more than 10,000 aging dams across the tri-state and discovered hundreds of them are so poorly maintained they could ultimately cause life-threatening floods.
So the devastation is tremendous for these communities. And if we don't take action, that's the type of consequence that we could see.
Of the nearly 14,000 dams in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, 941 are considered high hazard because people would likely die if they fail. So these are the dams we paid the closest attention to and discovered 273 of them. So about 1 out of every 3 flunked their last safety inspection, receiving a rating of poor, unsound, or deficiently maintained. That's the case at the troubled Lake Sebago Dam in the Harriman State Park, where a breach would flood 7 communities downstream in New York and New Jersey. Yet a state engineer called the structure's inadequate spillway capacity a serious issue. Top aquatic ecologist George Jackman refers to the tri-state's aging dams as ticking time bombs right in our backyard.
I don't think people understand the power that's behind these dams.
Our review of open records also led to another alarming discovery, a chronic pattern of poor emergency planning, especially in New York, where 1 out of every 5 dam owners legally required to file an emergency action plan, known as an E.A.P, with the state, has failed to comply. The Bowman Avenue Dam in Rybrook is one of 209 dams in the state without a required E.A.P on file. But that's not the reason the nearly century-old structure once made international headlines.
Iran hacks into the control system.
So what's at stake here at the end of the day?
Your lives and property.
Greg McKenzie was hired to install a new computer at the site after the highly publicized hack, but says the dam remains vulnerable today and is still in a state of disrepair.
It's an accident, bad accident waiting to happen.
Ultimately, who is responsible for repairs is the dam's owners, which can be a state or local government, even private individuals, who not surprisingly say they often don't have the money to fix them.
You can have a catastrophic consequence.
We've created an online tool you can use to search for the safety inspections of your local dam. Head to news12.com to get started.
Back now on board Chopper 12 on this beautiful, crisp day with clear skies. We are here because this is what this same vantage point looked like during the aftermath of Hurricane Ida. Entire blocks submerged, thousands of homes and businesses across the tri-state damaged or destroyed. And the worst part, many of those homeowners didn't even know they were at risk of flooding. Our senior investigative reporter, Walt Kane, explains why.
This is where we had our Christmas parties. We had everybody here from the family. Can't do it now.
Residents of the Rossmore 55 and over community will never forget the day they were hit by the remnants of Ida.
They took myself and my neighbor out in a boat.
This is Fran Klinsky's 4th severe flood.
One of the biggest things I lost was the ceremonial flag for my brother's funeral. And that hit hard.
Frightening as these images are, consider this. These homeowners now have to pay for tens of thousands of dollars in repairs with no help from insurance. The federal government says their homes are not in a flood zone, so flood insurance is not required.
You guys don't have flood insurance.
No, I don't. You know, a lot of people said, you don't need it. It's not a flood zone.
It's a story we're hearing more and more. From Greenwich, Connecticut.
Other than the kitchen table and one dresser, everything else is gone.
To Great Neck, Long Island.
Everything I have to throw it out. I don't know how to live like this.
Homeowners devastated by floods in areas outside flood zones, meaning FEMA says they should flood less than once a century.
My kitchen has to be gutted, my living room and dining room has to all be gutted.
Why is this happening? For one thing, our Team 12 investigation finds the government relies on flood maps that are decades old. The last flood map FEMA released was in 2010, but data from the agency shows some individual map panels have not been updated since the 1970s.
A lot has changed in the last 50 years. I mean, we have this trend of increasing heavy rainfall events, and that data, when you put it into the models that produce the maps, create different maps.
The First Street Foundation compared FEMA's flood maps to areas that had actually suffered severe flooding and found almost 6 million more properties at risk of flooding than the official maps show.
When you don't account for that, then folks don't know that they have risk and they don't have insurance.
The group also built an online tool, Flood Factor, that lets homeowners see their flood risk now and over the next 30 years.
Our goal is really to take this publicly available data, make it accessible, and then communicate it in a way that's easy to understand.
Take that neighborhood in Great Neck. FEMA shows no flood zones in the area. First Street's model shows there is one. And remember that 55 and over community in New Jersey? FEMA's map shows the flood zone ends long before it gets to Fran Klinsky's or Ann Wernick's home. But First Street shows much of the neighborhood at risk.
So literally right down that sidewalk is a flood zone, but
Yes.
here isn't.
Here is not. No.
Some lawmakers had proposed fixing the problem by spending $3 billion for new flood maps in the new infrastructure bill. But that funding was cut from the final version. As for Fran Klinsky, she says she's tired of waiting for things to get better. After her fourth severe flood, she's putting her home up for sale. If you'd like to see the latest data on your home's flood risk, follow the QR code on your screen or go to news12.com to use the Flood Factor tool. I'm Walt Kane, News 12.
Up next, countless homeowners are still struggling to recover from Ida. So what is the MTA doing to protect commuters from the next big storm? Plus, bridges over 100 years old and in need of repair. Failing foundations. We'll be right back. You've seen the videos, strap hangers swimming through New York City subways during serious storms. But what if we told you the MTA spent millions of dollars on floodgates that they've never used to protect the system used by millions of tri-state commuters? When Superstorm Sandy hit, the MTA invested big money in getting the world's largest transit system ready for the next flood. When Ida hit, the floodwaters returned, but the MTA didn't use any of its floodgates. Why? Our Sabrina Franza found out.
I did not expect to ever have to trek through the trains and through the tunnels of the MTA.
Nicholas Hernandez spent Ida stuck underground.
So real safe. They were just trying to help people kind of climb down the train. Thank you.
3 hours later, he was out.
Watch your head.
Team 12 Investigates found that the MTA has dozens of floodgates that they've never used. Not during Ida, never. Flex gates and marine doors, designed to prevent the world's largest subway system from flooding.
This past summer proved that that list is not effective because we've seen flooding in areas of the city which we're not used to seeing before.
The transit agency says you can't use this equipment for a flash flood disaster like Ida because it was built for a coastal storm like Superstorm Sandy, when water surged over the coastline.
Are there any plans to use something like a flex gate for a flash flood type situation?
No, there are not.
Most of the stations Ida turned into waterfalls weren't the ones outfitted after Sandy, so even if the MTA wanted to use those gates, it wouldn't have mattered. It also takes too long.
10 to 8 hours.
Time for installation, but also to evacuate the subway system.
This flex gate is basically like a pool cover, except instead of covering water beneath, it holds all the water on top.
There are 68 across the city. It takes about 8 staff members to crank open.
A lot of manpower.
Then there are 22 marine doors, massive 2,000-pound floodgates you don't want to get stuck behind.
With these pins locked down, 20 pounds of air pressure sealing this gate shut, no one is coming in this subway or going out.
Protects us from having an inundation of water.
After Superstorm Sandy, the MTA received $7.8 billion federal dollars to get the subway ready for the next flood. They still haven't spent all of it, citing coordination issues with other agencies. And now 9 years later, with nearly $2 billion left in the bank, the MTA could get a possible $10 billion more from the newly passed infrastructure bill.
They're raising curbs or lowering streets.
After Ida, identifying over 160 new stations vulnerable to flash flooding, writing a resiliency to-do list with other city agencies, DOT and DEP, who manage the streets and the sewage system.
A joint effort in order to make progress.
It's still not clear that the MTA will use the money for flood resiliency at all. The agency is even asking for more money from FEMA.
We're waiting for the check.
For now, the system is left with unused resiliency equipment, useless against flash flooding.
Right now, it's pretty much just a Band-Aid.
Yes.
That's unless, with new federal funding, the MTA finds a way to fix it. Sabrina Franza, News 12.
I'm Josh Bedrosian, and we're taking you on a ride to see some of the oldest infrastructure in the tri-state area that may be impacting your commute, from frustrating delays to failures you may experience on the rails.
I actually have to leave 45 minutes earlier.
Amy Barrett, a working mom, was on her daily commute when this drawbridge failed to close after opening a mechanical failure that left thousands of tri-state commuters stranded for hours.
At least 2 hours of waiting through this process. My babysitter actually finally loaded my kids up in the car and came down and picked me up.
Amy thought it was a one-time thing, especially since this bridge is a vital artery connecting over 18,000 commuters a day in the tri-state area.
Going over it, I do hold my breath a little bit because you just never know if something's going to give way.
The state says they've been patching up infrastructure on the tracks for years, and it's put one of the most critical bridges for Metro North and Amtrak in crumbling condition, and it's something you probably ride over every single day without knowing about it. The Walk Bridge here in Norwalk, essential to the Northeast Corridor connecting Boston to Washington, D.C. But a Team 12 investigation found that this failure is an example of more systemic problems with the tri-state area's aging bridges, roads, and railroads, causing frustrating delays and unsafe conditions. The Team 12 investigates found in 2011 the bridge failed 12 times. In 2013, it fell 16 times out of 271 openings, and in 2014, it fell twice within a 2-week period. The DOT acknowledged in a 2019 inspection report that the 125-year-old bridge had significant rust, section loss, and misalignment. According to inspection reports from 2019 to 2021, this bridge was found to be in poor condition. Document records also show that they call this bridge deteriorated, not up to standard, and failed numerous times over the years.
It's failing. The center pin is failing.
The DOT commissioner says it's taken so long to replace because of the impacts on the surrounding community and the need for permits and state and federal funding.
We want to move beyond Band-Aid to turning around and going in there and doing a job and having it be completed.
And New Jersey sees the same problem in their century-old Portal Bridge. The bridge malfunctions to open and close, and Amtrak reports bridge openings resulted in 230 hours and 1,000 train delays.
A choke point, a bottleneck, an Achilles heel in the Northeast Corridor.
There's dozens of other bridges in the tri-state that have been neglected and are structurally deficient, and they could get the help they need in the new infrastructure deal with $40 billion allocated to replacements.
Rebuilding this bridge is vital. The link that carries literally millions of commuters.
Both the Walk Bridge and Portal Bridge have expensive price tags and are fully funded through state and federal grants. But officials say they're the catalyst to get critical infrastructure back on track.
We're not doing like we did in the past, putting a Band-Aid on so we can keep it going. It's too critical.
Shosh Bedrosian, News 12.
Still to come, billions of dollars is heading from Washington to here in the tri-state, but will it come to the rescue of our crumbling infrastructure? Failing foundations. We'll be right back.
Politicians celebrating the billions of dollars headed to the tri-state thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure bill.
But what does all that money mean for improving your drive or your flight? Our Scott McGee shows us.
Well, commute times have increased 10% in the past 10 years in the Nutmeg State.
That's why it's getting more than $4 billion over the next 5 years, plus another $1.3 billion over 5 years to improve public transportation and $63 million to improve the state's airports. Then there's the Garden State.
New Jersey, this is a big deal. This is a big freaking deal.
Where civil engineers recently gave the state a D+ on its infrastructure report card, commute times are up 9% over the past decade, but they're getting $8 billion over the next 5 years to improve their bridges and highways, plus another $4.5 billion for public transit and $272 million to improve New Jersey's airports. But the biggest checks go to the Empire State.
Great bill, huge investments.
Where commute times are up some 7.4%. $13.5 billion will pay for a lot of improvements to bridges and highways, plus another $11.2 billion for public transportation and $685 million to improve the state's airports. For News 12, I'm Scott McGee.
The bill also includes money for electric vehicle charging stations, rural broadband, and clean drinking water. For more data and online tools, we invite you now to head to news12.com and search Failing Foundations. I'm Tara Rosenblum. Thank you for joining us for this special report.